Camera, everyone, the online film forum of the Browning Cinema. And at the top of the show, along with welcoming you, we do have something we'd like to say to everyone who's out there, and I like to read it in order to get it correctly, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. During these uncertain times that have moved us out of the physical Browning Cinema and into a virtual one, our thoughts are with those battling the virus, battling isolation, battling precarity, and battling the fear inherent to this moment. And alongside that, we want to extend our thanks and appreciation to the first responders, medical professionals, grocers, public transit workers, childcare workers, and anyone else on the front lines. Zoom back camera is a very small thing to offer, but we do hope these conversations about movies we love will buoy your day and continue the education, fellowship, and dialogue with which we like to bracket our films in the Browning Cinema. And as we like to do in the Browning Cinema, feel free to say hello in the chat. If you leave comments or questions, we'll do our best to address them during the discussion. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest and curator, Yvette Rodriguez. Hello, Yvette.
Hi there.
Hey, you are known very well on campus for the amazing work and programs that you do, but can you tell the viewers and listeners out there a little bit about yourself and what you do?
For sure. Originally from Des Moines, Iowa, a cyclone, not the Hawkeye State.
Oh, Ames Pride. Ames
Yes.
Pride. Yeah, signing
Yes.
up there.
Yes, and what brought me here, I'm a transplant to South Bend, the job at Notre Dame. So I have my master's in higher education student affairs, and when I went on the job search, I went to a conference in Indianapolis, having no idea that I was in the state that I would eventually live in. I saw the job posted at Notre Dame and interviewed at the conference and got it. I've been here since, working in multicultural student programs and services, supporting our students of color as our primary audience and educating our white students as our secondary audience. We do large and small scale programming, as well as supporting student clubs and organizations.
Quick question: as someone who is a Hawkeye turned Hoosier, and I mean that in terms of the nickname, not necessarily the school, do you feel like you are in a different state? Has it dawned on you that you're a Hoosier?
Sometimes not so much, because I'll be like, oh yeah, let's go on a road trip home. And this is home. This is where we've settled down. This is where we are for the time being. But for some reason, Iowa is always home. And I'm always super proud when I see a lot of the news coming out of there and a lot of the good things. I saw recently a news article, I think it was the mayor of Earlham. He bought gift cards for the entirety of the town, and it added up to everyone in the town, because he didn't want anyone left out. And there was this donor who was giving all of this money to support the local businesses. And I just thought that was, just things like that remind me of home, remind me of Iowa, and will always be the place that I hold near and dear to my heart. I'm slowly getting settled into South Bend and learning about the people and the things to do and all of that good stuff. So maybe eventually I'll convert, but it hasn't happened yet.
And I think the other issue is that it's not dissimilar enough. If it's New York, if it is like Laguna Beach, like it's a different world. The fact that they're a close enough facsimile makes it hard to be like, oh, I'm in a different state. So
agreed.
I when I find an Iowan in Indiana, I always want to know.
Yeah, I stopped someone on campus wearing a Hawkeye shirt. I was like, oh, hey. And I was like, wow, first time I've ever tried to bond with a Hawkeye like that.
Or whenever you see the Iowa plates and they have the county, and you're like, oh, Cedar Rapids, oh, Storm Lake. And like, if they're Northwest Iowa, I'm flagging them down. I'm like, okay, I need to chat with you. So tell us a little bit about the first time you saw the film, which you're curating tonight, which is Young Adult from 2011.
Yes, it was a movie that we picked out. I was watching with my sorority sisters. I was a member of a multicultural sorority with
Which one?
primarily Sigma Lambda Gamma with primarily Latina roots, but multicultural membership. And we were looking for a girls' night movie, so we chose this DVD. Yes, we were watching DVDs, not streaming. Maybe I'm aging myself. Um, but we chose this movie. We settled in with our snacks, and we thought we were going to have a really good time, like laughing and enjoying a comedy. We thought it would be lighthearted, especially with the way the cover, the picture on the cover was, her in her pajamas with her dog. So it was funny, and we thought it would be more of a traditional comedy, but then we watched it, and then we all just had this moment where we kind of looked at each other and said, that was not what we expected. But we did have a really good conversation, and we did have a really good girls' night, just not the one that we pictured.
I can believe that. Well, and like the Patton Oswalt, I mean, there's some signaling in it that would confuse someone who's picking up a red box, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, what's happened in the movie, and off the bat, we are thrown into a very sterile, overcast world. I was reflecting, we don't really see the sun that much in this movie. It's very
Not
much
at
a
all.
gray movie. And we learn that we meet Mavis, who has moved from her small town of Mercury, Minnesota, to the mini Apple. As someone, you grew up in Des Moines.
Mhm.
What was the promised land for Des Moines? Like, what was the apex predator city? Like, where were, like, if you move up the chain, where do you move up from Des Moines? Because that's the
Mhm.
the Moiny apple of Iowa.
Pretty much. Stereotypically, Chicago. I know that a lot of folks really wanted to move to a big city, and a lot of folks hated on Iowa. I myself hated on Iowa for some time in my very, very early 20s, but I've really come to appreciate it a lot. And I think I appreciate it in a way that you can only appreciate after you've left home. I lived in Boston for a while as an intern, and that, you know, when I had signed up for that internship, I thought that was super cool and the thing to do. And I thought that's where I would end up when I job searched after my master's, because I had such a great time living there. But then I also had to make some very adult choices about standard of living and paychecks and some of the aspects of the big city that aren't as attractive, and ended up right here in South Bend.
And we meet someone who has moved to her South Bend, but isn't necessarily thriving in her South Bend.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of signaling of arrested development.
Mhm.
I think none more straightforward than chugging directly out of a 2 liter of Diet Coke, which is both the
Yes.
kid thing to do and the adult pop. Do you have any, like, I don't do this in front of company, food or drink moves that you pull that you're willing to admit?
Definitely. I actually had a college roommate who would drink a Diet Coke every morning, not a 2 liter. But yeah, my not finest moment, but it's really delicious. Chicken nuggets dipped in nacho cheese sauce.
Ooh, decadent.
Yeah, very tasty. Not exactly the classiest.
No. And talking about classy jobs, a ghostwriter of a young adult series that is, I think, effectively a Sweet Valley High. Is that how you read
Yeah, or like
Gossip Girl? Or
yeah, Pretty Little Liars without the TV show.
right? So,
Definitely.
so Mavis is in uh, this this stunted role where
Mm.
she's not able to be at the top perch, but she's somewhere there. And that's, in a lot of ways, again, if you think about a young adult and just arrested development, that fiction gets to that in some ways. Do you have a young adult series that you followed or read or still love from your young adult days?
Yeah, I actually pretty routinely like to read young adult literature. I find it, it's really quick and easy, and it's also usually pretty action packed. My favorite series would be His Dark Materials, which has The Golden Compass. The movie's absolute trash. So if you watched the movie and didn't like it, please read the book. It's a lot better. Those books were my favorite. The Divergent series started out really, really good with the books, but then at the end, I just kind of got the feeling that she was rushing to get done. And the movies the same way. Like the first Divergent movie was awesome, and Shailene Woodley does a great job. But
They have like a Meryl Streep in that one, right? Or no, wait, who's not Meryl Streep? It's a Julianne Moore. There's a big name in that one. Kate Winslet?
Yes, yes.
There it is. I was like, there's an Oscar winner in that. They start big.
Yes, yes. So the first one is really, really good, but then at the end, the movies just really diverge from the book. And pun not
As I
intended.
mean, they told you they were going to diverge.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the movies just kind of at the end were really not the greatest.
Mm-hmm. And we have an errant email or just this general announcement that Mavis receives regarding the birth of a child. These are boilerplate emails that go out to the world. Obviously hits a nerve for her. She goes on a date where you see the transactional nature. And at this point, I don't think we've learned that she is divorced. Have we?
No, that
Okay.
comes up later on in the movie for sure.
But a bad date where he talks about his time in Vietnam that she would read as being horrible, as worthwhile, and things get screwing in her head and she decides to head on home to Mercury. And this is where I think the tropes of like a Sweet Home Alabama and Elizabethtown start to get inverted and played with. But when you're making that drive across I-80, do you have any rituals for going home? Any music that you play? Any stops you like to make?
I for sure have to stop at the I-80 world's largest truck stop. That is a must have. Casey's Pizza and their tater tots is also a must have. In terms of music, kind of depends on my mood. Sometimes I will actually, funnily enough, listen to older music that I would have listened to when I lived back home. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe just reliving the moment. And then podcasts for sure, true crime, but
Any you've been
yeah.
listening to lately that you'd recommend for people out there?
Yeah, Crime Junkie is really good. One of the women on it actually lives in South Bend.
That's the local one, right? Okay.
Yep. So that's pretty good. Dateline is good, but I discovered not so good for driving because it's sort of a monotone type voice, can really lull you to sleep. Anything by Wondery, they have Over My Dead Body, and then they also did a podcast about Joe Exotic before the whole Tiger King thing on Netflix blew up. So I would definitely check that one out too. The podcast, I personally think, is a little more meaty than the show.
And back into the world of young adult, checking into a Hampton Inn, and we start to see that she has various cracks, and one of them is lying about a dog that's in a bag. It's clear, it's evident, the world all knows this, yet you are still hanging onto a facade. It's not a great sign.
Yeah.
And connects with Patrick Wilson, Buddy Slade, and faceless at this point, just with the milk. And we see that she is going to rekindle a high school relationship or a previous relationship. Well, that's on pause. She meets another former classmate, Matt Penn Oswald, and we see that she is quickly lamenting a better time and place. that she is mourning. And what's the like the root of nostalgia is like missing home, right? Like the translation of it.
Yeah.
And she's missing that home, that time and place. And I'm curious because you work with students who are so successful in high school, and then they get to college, and it is a threshold, it's a new time. How do you encourage them to break into new worlds, experience new things, especially in this era where I think you carry so much baggage with you via social media, via being connected to home, that people didn't, 2 decades ago?
Mhm. Yeah, it's really interesting in terms of trends that I see. I see the big fish in a little pond syndrome, in the sense that everyone was the best at everything in their high school. And now we're at Notre Dame where everyone was the best and everyone is exceptional.
Oh, I think we might have
Or fail their
lost.
first test like any other college student, but it can hit especially hard. I think it can be.
Hey, Yvette, I think we might be losing some of the connection here, which is bound to happen. If you want to pop back in when you have a chance, that'd be great. And sorry, folks who might be watching live, we'll just take a second, let her reboot. And we were discussing that tabula rasa moment that people may not necessarily have as often anymore, getting the clean slate. If that is something that interests you or any other questions, go ahead and leave a note while we reboot here with Yvette, and I'm going to do a little bit of tech on my side. Hey, hey,
There we are.
hey.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem, no problem. We lost you at some point just talking about briefly, like, how do you get kids to say, and I say kids, sorry, how do you get undergraduate students to open up and say, like, I am not the person I am at 18, especially when there's so much pressure to inhabit success and those spaces that might have already been drawn by parents?
Definitely. Working with young adults, if you will, I think
Mhm.
it's important for them to feel the freedom to try on different things, try on different personalities, try on different things to be into, try different friend groups. I think one thing that I've noticed is there's a tendency for students to think that they have to hang out with the students in their dorm and they have to find the clique right away when they get to Notre Dame. And I think Moreau, at least for me, when I teach Moreau and have some of these conversations, I think normalizing, and what I try to do is normalize that if you haven't found your friend group and it's week 4 or so, it might take some time. If you decide to change friend groups while you're at college, that's okay too. It doesn't have to look exactly the way it was marketed on the admissions brochure, and or it doesn't have to look the way it looks on someone else's social media or highlight reel. No one is posting, or at least not many are posting about their struggles. They're posting about, I just failed my first test and I don't know what to do. But everyone is still going through it. There's a real problem with loneliness on campus for sure. We have the data from McWell that talks about it. And I think what people need to do is really take those barriers down and take down the perfectionism. Nobody's perfect. And I try to model that sometimes in class too. One of the topics a few weeks ago was about sustainability. And I had to say, listen, I'm not always the best. Sometimes I'm using paper plates, or I'm drinking out of a plastic water bottle. Sometimes I'm doing these things that aren't perfect. I'm not really sure what the best route is with sustainability. And I opened it up for the students to fill in what they do and what they know and the things that they've researched. And it was a really great class to be able to just create knowledge together and to really model that you don't have to be the utmost authority on everything or perfect in every way.
That's interesting because we find that Mavis is someone who clearly is only going to present perfectly to Buddy, but in Matt, she has her landfill of sort, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can shovel my crap on him, and I can be more genuine with him. Thoughts on Matt, Patton Oswalt, how you read the character, how you read him into the story, how you feel about him?
Yeah, I really like him because I think he's a good foil to her delusion, because he seems to be one of the characters who has a grip on reality and who has processed some of these terrible things that have happened to him and has grown up in a way that trauma can sometimes inspire. Whereas, Mavis clearly has a lot of untouched baggage and clearly has maybe not been challenged in some of the same ways and had to grow up as quickly. So I see him as a really good foil for her. And then also, again, it's really great to just see someone who actually has some sense, and he's nerdy and quirky, and he's owned these things in a way that when you grow up really owning these things about yourself tends to happen. And he has action figures, and he is it whiskey or moonshine or something, he
Urban, whatever.
yeah,
Booze,
whatever it is,
hooch.
he's yeah, right, hooch. He's got this hobby that he's passionate about, and he's got these things in his life that, even though, okay, you're living in the basement maybe with your parents, we never see them, we do see the sister though, but he's living life and doing his thing and giving himself permission to do so in a way that Mavis has not at all thought about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his reward and his positive energy does come from within. He's self-generating,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to I am taking it from the outside, and that's how I know where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
And Mavis also strikes me as someone who, in social comparison, is constantly using other people to see where she's at in the world. And that seems to not be his approach. that it's not, I won't judge myself against other people. It's, here are the things I love. If I'm doing them, then I'm loving myself. So a good takeaway. We get the first date, or a date, or whatever you want to, date in Mavis's mind,
Right.
between her and Buddy at Champions. And we'll see that Matt is going to serve as this like ombudsman person for Mavis's behavior in some ways. He's omnipresent, he's around, he's checking her, and a voice of reason in a lot of ways. But this like knockoff BW3s, like sometimes I worry about the film punching up, sometimes it's punching down. How do you think it plays generally? Do you think this is a punching up or down, or where do you put it?
Good question. I think a little of both. And I think also in a way that acknowledges that sometimes we think the grass is greener, and sometimes we think moving to the city, or we think all of these things are going to give us fulfillment. And there's people who are fulfilled in the lives that they're living and are choosing to be happy and choosing to fulfill their lives and live in a way where the happiness really comes within. But there are people in both boats, both the city sort of chic sort of lifestyle that everyone plays up, and also the folks who are married with children and living in Mercury. There are people on both sides of it, right, who are experiencing discontent, or who aren't quite sure if this is where they want to be. In the beginning, when she's with her friend and they're eating the McDonald's and they're talking about this email, I notice on the friend's face that when she's talking about how bad Mercury is and how bored they all are and how they're unhappy because they're married with kids, there was a look on her friend's face that to me kind of said, oh yeah, we're so much better, but like we're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And the small jokes that I think signal to some people that, oh, they're making fun of town mouses. This is really a movie about the city mouse getting her comeuppance. And so the lines about, oh, we're getting a Chipotle, and people kind of laugh at that. I was like, I grew up just wanting a Wendy's. If we had a Chipotle, I'd be out of here. I wouldn't be out of here. I'd be there forever. So I think it's one of the inversions that it's doing, along with a lot of other tropes, where it's setting you up to assume it's punching down on these people when actually it's going to ultimately not read that way. But, and we then, because Mavis is lonely in her hometown, it is either Matt or Buddy, and Buddy is largely unattainable and not available. So she finds out, or she goes back to Matt, and I think this is the first time she meets him, his space, the bourbon and things like that. And there's this trope of a wealthy person getting knocked down and needing to hang out with people of less financial means that you see in films. And this one's interesting, and that would be like a Schitt's Creek, right?
Yeah.
And this is interesting because it's not financial capital, it is rusted high school social class capital. But how do you feel about that? Okay, we have the prom queen, and we'll just call him the nerd for lack of a better, like just thinking in movie tropes, coming and reconnecting years after. Do you like that relationship?
I do in some ways, because it's something that never would have happened in high school. And I think it's really fascinating because, again, he's exposing her delusion. He's exposing a lot of the things that we love to hate about the most popular girl, right? We love to hate that, oh my gosh, everybody loves her and she seems so perfect. He gets to see behind the veil, and he gets to see that low key her life is kind of falling apart. And this veneer of perfectionism has never been true, but is especially not true. And I definitely think that getting out of high school is sort of an equalizer. I think moving on from those roles and moving on from that particular way that it seems to play out, even though times change, I feel like the high school experience never changes. in that regard. I think it's really interesting as adults. I've run into folks who are definitely more popular than me in high school, but the relationship is different as adults. It's more cordial. It's more, yeah, we've all moved on and we're doing our thing type. So it was interesting to see that play out in film. And it was really interesting in the ways there were some cliches, right? The fact that he, you know, still probably liked her, even though, he's seeing that maybe the image of her that he liked is not her now. And when he says, guys like me are made to love girls like you, very much a cliche, very much a cliche that, the nerd is in love with the prom queen, but I can't help but root for him a little bit, right? I just really like his character in general in this film.
Mhm. It is falling back to the tropes and staying
Yeah.
with, I was taught this in high school, I will stay on this path. Someone noted in the comments he has his own Arrested Development, and this is one of those ways that he's willing to move back into that cycle, even if I think because we see him at a lowlier state, or we imagine him in a lowlier state before we see that
Mhm.
bending positively, it's still problematic.
Definitely.
Yeah. Uh, so Mavis then goes shopping for her big date
Hmm.
with Buddy at the rock concert or whatnot. How big do you think Mercury, Minnesota is? Because I thought it was like I don't know, like a Story City or something.
Yeah.
But they have a Macy's, and like I can't read this town. I don't know what it is.
That's a really interesting coincidence because actually you wouldn't think a Macy's is in that small of a town, right? I don't know if that was maybe an editing mistake or something because I was thinking Mercury was maybe even smaller than South Bend,
Oh,
right? Like
definitely. I would,
I was
yeah,
thinking,
five,
yeah,
ten
I was thinking
thousand.
like one stoplight type of,
Mm-hmm.
type of town. But yeah, the Macy's is a little out of place. And my favorite part of that scene is when the woman, she tells her what it's for, the dress is for, and she just sort of walks away. It's like, all right, I have someone else who can help you with that.
Yeah, and that's another example of when you run this particular form of delusion against a neutral target, it's just alarms.
It sounds crazy. If someone was to tell me that, I would be like, are you okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what we get, and it's played for humor, but it's also a good check. Like, oh, not everyone in this world is playing to the script. It's,
Hmm.
there is reality and recognition around them, even though we're getting the very skewed views because those are the people with whom we're hanging out.
Hmm.
Did you? What's the nipple? What's the name of the band again?
Oh God, I don't know.
Well, anyway, did you like the band? Would you go to their concert?
A little bit. I thought it was really cute that she covered her husband's song and was just like playing her heart out, even though they sound terrible, and just having a really great time. I really liked it. I thought it was cute. And I thought that the relationship that they have, Buddy and his wife, I really appreciated it. I appreciated the way that she wasn't threatened by Mavis at all. And later on, you find out that she even wanted to invite Mavis to the party because she felt sorry for her. And the fact that, he's not drinking in solidarity, and just a lot of little cute moments between the two of them that I really felt like, okay, these two are best friends. That's the type of relationship I like to see, that they're really best friends. There's not a lot of insecurity, there's not a lot of drama. I'm sure they quarrel like everyone else, but they just seem to have a really good connection, and it's just really cute to watch.
And if we're looking at people who are calling like people who are speaking truth in this movie, the fact that the lead singer, guitarist, someone in the band just recognizes her and calls her like a
Yeah.
psychotic prom queen bitch was like, oh, she has that legacy around her and people are reading her that way. Were prom queens evil in your high school? Ours were always, it was like it was like the era of mean girls had passed in some ways, and it was nice girls and nice boys that would be lauded this way. What was the social, like, I know you talk about this for a while,
Yeah.
but what was roughly like the social dynamic of popularity? Was it
Yeah.
Iron Fist win?
It's really interesting because there were a number of popular girls who were not the nicest, but the girls who always won homecoming queen, at least in my mind, were always like girl next door, cheerleader type and all that stuff. A lot of times blonde, insert stereotype here, but also, I don't know, maybe it's something about Iowa and what we like, but they were always the girl next door in my mind. A lot of the women that I saw winning prom queen, it wasn't, maybe some of the meaner ones were on prom court, but the girl who won was always girl next door for some reason.
Mhm. And some people are mentioning in the comments here that there is a lot to make this of presenting perfection, and some people call that out. Other people let her continue those delusions. An example would be how her parents, she says, I'm an alcoholic to her parents, and they don't recognize that at all.
And it was very deadpan too.
Yeah. But this, we're getting the cycle where we start to see that she will burn everything around her down, including herself, to get to Buddy, which she may not even want. At this point, we get the idea that this is not a redemption arc that we're watching. And
Yeah.
for you,
It's a train wreck.
yeah, how do you cycle between empathy, sympathy, pity, disgust? I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot with her because she has some brutal personality qualities. But how did you read her?
Yeah. For most of the film, I felt sorry for her. For some parts, especially when she was trying to go after Buddy Slade, and especially when she came to the party and like crapped all over this awesome event. I hated her. But I knew it came from a place of insecurity. I knew it came from this utter delusion. I mean, she clearly needs help, right? Like she has a lot of things that she has not processed, that she has not thought about. But there was one piece of it that I really found um relatable. And I think it's the idea of, are we ever where we really want to be in life? You know, are we completely happy where we're at? Do we want something else for ourselves? Do we wish that we would have had, I don't know, a different career or a different dream that we gave up on? Sort of the butterfly effect idea of maybe what life would have been like. I don't know. I think about that sometimes for sure. And I think about ways that I want to improve, or ways that maybe I feel like, oh, I could have done better, or I could have done this, or I should have done that. And I think that that part is maybe relatable, and maybe something that's cycling back into consciousness and what people want to think and talk about. I recently saw a movie called Girl Most Likely To on either Hulu or Netflix, and it was the same type of idea, where it's this woman where she's just not as successful as she thought she would be. And oddly enough, she's a writer too, so I'm like, whoever wrote this must have watched young adult and then had a couple of beers and kicked back and wrote this movie. But it's really, really interesting. And I think that that's something that I think maybe will always be relatable. I think it'll always be relatable to think about reaching your potential and what that means or doesn't mean. And have you done it?
Now you're large. I mean, you came of age in, I would say, the social media world. Like, you weren't, like, you graduated from high school in
2007.
Okay, so you were always you always have you seen the cycle of self-comparison of college students getting like has it ramped up? Is it
Yes.
like social media came around, it's all pretty steady? Or is this I define myself by what I see becoming larger in terms of the students with whom you work, do you think?
I think it's definitely a big deal. And I think it's definitely more of a thing because I think people are doing more fake stuff, if you will, right? Like taking particular types of pictures for posting, couple goals, hashtag this and that, all of that kind of stuff. All of these will you go to prom with me like videos and stuff that gets put on YouTube. I think there's an element of acting and an element of um stunting, right? That I don't think was there when I was starting to engage with social media. When I was starting to engage with social media, I think it was much more like, you're just out and people are taking pictures when you're out with your friends and it is what it is. And then later you're looking for jobs and you think you need to take some things down. Whereas now it's very much a facade. And there are these influencers and get the perfect angle with your camera. So it looks like you have the perfect body. But then in reality, no one has the perfect body. I think it's definitely ramped up. And I think it's definitely unhealthy in a lot of ways. I think there are some people who are trying to break the stigma, and I've seen some women posting pictures of stretch marks and a lot of celebrities, Alicia Keys posting without makeup, but Alicia Keys, come on, you're so gorgeous anyway. Like, is that really inspiring to the rest of us? But there are, I think, some pushbacks and some things that are happening to try to counteract some of that. But I definitely think that it's tough. And there are studies that show using a lot of social media, the more you use, correlates, not necessarily causation, but definitely correlates with the higher rates of depression and anxiety. So it's definitely real in a way that I don't think was real in our time.
Mhm. Well, somewhat related to that, the the whole idea that she's writing young adult, but not able to actually get in their minds and give their voice, and
Mhm.
she is having writer's block because she's not in that world, so she's
Yeah.
going back into it and inhabiting it and eavesdropping in order to get dialogue, is a recognition that she's not in college anymore. Did you have an aha moment ever, like, oh, that's the way they dance, or something?
Yeah. It was when I was in grad school. So I graduated my bachelor's in psychology, and I had no idea what I was going to do with that because you can do everything and nothing all at the same time. And so I worked in admissions for 3 years, and then I went back to grad school for higher education student affairs, and I was doing a program with students, and I was doing an icebreaker, and I said, okay, well, what's the most recent song that you've listened to? Because it gets good dialogue, people agree or disagree, or it gets people talking. And when I realized that I didn't know about half the people they were talking about, I realized that yeah, I had definitely crossed the line into being an adultier adult.
um, and she bumps into her mom, didn't know she was there, and is brought back into that environment. And we see that this is not a warm environment. She doesn't go home often. There appears not to be
Yeah.
connections. The conversations they have are comical. I mean, they're satirical. I mean, broad satire of
Yeah.
bad breakfast table conversations. And from that, she runs back to Matt. She often goes to Matt in times of need. That is her.
Mm-hmm.
That is. Well, this is clicking a little bit. It's also Matt for her is someone where she has her capital is through not. She's not identifying someone who's aspirational. It's self-enhancing. I'm better than him. So
Mm-hmm.
it restores where she is. and they go, they drink some Star Wars juice. I might steal that term.
Right.
Get drunk in the woods. And we have both ways. They are attacking and parrying and lashing out in order to test armor and see where it is. And we get lines like, I didn't know you were such a slut. And then she says, I was normal. Like, it's no one's like allowing things to show that they're really hitting in some. But anyway, how did that ring true for you? How people interact and how when people aren't like hurt people. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely true. I think how someone treats you oftentimes has a lot more to do with them than it does you. A lot of times, maybe someone is going through something, and maybe your particular personality or the way you look or whatever it is triggers that thing that they're either dealing with or trying desperately to bury and not interact with. I think it's definitely true. And I think it's interesting the ways that people will verbally spar, right? I think the very Midwestern way of saying things without saying things sometimes. Sometimes people will, you know, make a joke that's not really a joke and then kind of see how you'll take it and see if you'll throw something back or if you're just going to let it fly or what does that look like. So it's really interesting to see that that's definitely something that people participate in, and it's definitely a way, I think in the Midwest in particular, sort of the passive aggressiveness sometimes of it, and sometimes like I said, like the joking but somebody's not really joking, and then how do you handle it and what do you do, and the way that someone will kind of dip their toe in, and then when they see that you're either going to take it or not take it, then they'll maybe jump a little further and jump a little deeper and maybe push and push. And sometimes I think even with family, right, I think sometimes people really want to just push your buttons, and people want to see where the line is, and people want to see what the reaction is. And it's interesting to see that we all do that to some level. We all sort of test each other out of, okay, what can I get away with? What is acceptable? What is this person gonna take and what are they not gonna take?
Mm-hmm. And the last scene, or I should say, the kind of the end of Act 4 in some ways. This surprised me. Like I didn't quite, the story structure shifted from kind of how I thought it was going to play out. But the big tension, dramatic scene is upon us at the hippie christening service, however they call it.
Yeah.
But that also, that hippie awareness too, and saying like it's not religious, is also signaling in some ways that they are like with it, that they are citified, right? That these aren't, they're cool in that way. But thoughts on how that scene plays out?
Yeah, it's sadly ironic and then also a little bit funny at the end that he has no idea and he's got the drum set and it's like ching, and it's sadly funny that it is sort of the punctuation mark to her deluge and sort of public breakdown. And I think that whole scene is just, again, a train wreck because it's so sad and it's so, I always wondered when she was gonna get it and how, she pulled him aside and, oh, you should leave, you should be with me type of thing. How did your mind get there, right? Like that's what I had wondered watching it. And then when she, talked about this could have been me, we could have had this ceremony and then we'd have a teenager right here. And it's like, okay, but it isn't. And it wasn't. And when were you going to grasp that particular reality? And when were you going to think about anyone other than yourself, right? Like this scene is so embarrassing to watch. Like I'm embarrassed for her, right? Because there are multiple times when she can kind of back away and stop it, but she just keeps going, right? Like when she got denied essentially by Buddy in private, she could have easily left the party. She didn't even have to go in the first place, but she was really sticking to her guns in a way that I don't know if I admire it or if it's scary or what, but
I think the latter for me at least, but
yeah, right. Like that level of determination of hanging on to something is a little bit scary for sure.
And how did you feel? What's interesting is we get this, some people are mentioning in the comments that we have a physical manifestation of old wounds, right? In her miscarriage. And did that, in some ways, it allows apologies to come in, or just it quickly reframes some things. Well, it reframes everything, doesn't absolve necessarily things.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I mean, granted, I take her at her word, but we also have an unreliable narrator, and so we don't necessarily. I mean, I read it as true, but the whole thing is,
Yeah.
you know, like things are up in the air. How'd you take that moment?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? And it's interesting the way as she is imploding or exploding, whichever way you want to take it. And she's got this wine all over her shirt. And Buddy's wife is still really trying to be nice. She's trying to help her wipe it off, and she's trying to, she's trying to be nice in a way that I find really admirable. This person is here ruining your party. You could have easily, and maybe she was angry, but maybe she was able to set it aside because she saw this person's hurt and need to be cared for and cared about. Because I don't know if she says it then or when she says it that nobody cares about her at some point during the movie. I think she does say it. So at that point, she's really setting aside any emotions that she has and wanting to really care for this person and really wanting to give her the love and care that she's clearly screaming out for in the whole movie. And that was a really interesting thing that I appreciated. And the way that she rejects it, right? The way that she wants her to be mad at her is really interesting. And I've seen it in a couple of other shows and movies that I've watched where they're like, no, like punch me though, be mad at me, something.
I've seen it in some borderline Friends too. Chapter and verse DSM.
Yeah.
But it is, the thing that's fascinating about the miscarriage as well is I did spend time thinking, there had to have been a lot of notes given about this, and just cycling through, if this is just like everything that went down, like the line with, if it were a sexual assault, if this were a pregnancy that was purposely terminated, like how like the story and narrative shifts and whatnot, and how, and the narrative necessity of a miscarriage in some ways, so that there aren't villains created, yet she is able to have a space where, yeah, she was, I mean, that's painful, that's horrible, but doing it in a way that doesn't blacken anyone else around her necessarily. It's an interesting device in that moment. And
for sure. And definitely the fact that it was out of her control, because I think control is definitely a big issue too. And I think that the fact that that was out of her control, that she had the miscarriage, and out of her control, everything else then spins out of her control.
And we then, well, she does call it a hick lake town that smells of fish shit. And I mean, this is someone who's, I mean, she's just, it's torching yeah, everything around her. But then she returns to Matt after all of this, which again, I think is this is just borderline behavior, right? Like, been
Totally.
rejected, I'll go to a very safe, it's like she started at the top of the tree and she's falling down branches, and she knows where the hammock is.
And that's the thing too. I think I would have called it, right? Like, I think I would have gotten in the Mini Cooper and gone back to my apartment with my dog,
Yeah.
right? But she clearly doesn't know when to call it.
No, she's got another step in her. And Matt this is where we get the line, I'm crazy and no one loves me. And then he says, guys like me are born loving women like you. And then she literally takes the shirt off his back.
And he gives it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of that's a tough scene to watch. It's done well. And because it's done well, it is difficult. But seeing what is going to be offered to him and his willingness to take it on and his willingness to comfort, but knowing that it's like the teacher in Vietnam, it's going to be a cold pillow in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. The next morning, Mavis talks to, is it Nancy, the sister who's a medical professional?
I don't even remember.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's the sister.
Yeah, the sister. And she is that 2 grades younger, sycophantic, like, oh, whatever you say is true. And it's nice because you see the ulterior motive here, where she just wants out. Like, she'd say anything to Mavis. And the two connect, as well. But anyway, what do you think about their conversation, what the sister feeds to Mavis, her kind of false awakening? Thoughts on how we wrap it up?
Yeah, first of all, I thought it was weird that Mavis grabs the coffee and gives it to the sister, and then somehow there's a mug just there waiting, and I'm like, this isn't your house. Like, how do you know? I don't know. It was really strange to me that somehow she was at home in a place that is clearly not her home. And it was a really, really interesting conversation in an interesting way. I even wonder to myself if the little sister deep down knows that, like, I'm looking at a train wreck right now and is trying to make her feel better. I think deep down, maybe the little sister does believe some of the things she's saying about getting out into the city and living this idolized, right? This idolized image that sometimes we have when we haven't left home or we haven't experienced anything different. I know that maybe some of that is rooted in truth for her, but I'm wondering if a part of her knows that she really just needs to say something to boost up this train wreck of a person who has clearly hit rock bottom, give them a pep talk, like just kind of pull her up out of where she is. And I wonder if she truly believes everything she says, or if some of it is fake, right? If some of it is just trying to make Mavis feel better about the life that she's lived and the places that she's been and all of that good kind of stuff. Because she has to see, at least I want to think that she has to see at some point that living in the city is not this chic, amazing thing, and that this prom queen clearly has gone through some stuff and clearly is not at the top of her game and not living her best life right now. Part of me wants to believe that the little sister has enough wisdom to at least pick up on some of that and isn't necessarily completely shallow and completely, believing the myth, if you will, of the life that Mavis was living, and that Mavis is so much better than everyone else. Part of me just really wants to believe that she knows that it's not true and Mavis isn't better, but she's trying to make her feel better.
So, you watched this film when you were in college, and now later on, you've had the moments for parallax. Did you read anything differently, or what was the big takeaway then as opposed to now? Or if you were going to show this to college students at Notre
Yeah.
Dame, what would you say, like, hey, I want you to watch this because A, B, or C?
Yeah, I think definitely it's different because I've lived some of this now, right? I've been a little further, I've been a little further removed from high school. I've had my quarter life crisis. I've wondered if I'm, is this what I'm supposed to do with my life? Is this it? What's going to happen? Um, I think having lived through some of that, this definitely hits different. Whereas when I watched it the first time, it was just this sort of, you know, funny but sad and realistic movie. Whereas now I'm like, oh, okay, like this is the reality for a lot of people. There is a coming to terms with your life and the choices you've made and where you're at now. And I think too, having looked back and, thinking about, okay, even romantic choices and romantic relationships, I don't think I would have picked up on the fact that the person that you want to be with in her mind, Buddy Slade, he's not the person he was then, and neither is she. So I think that's one thing is the movement and the growth. And if you're the same person 5 years ago, you probably still want to do a little bit growing. We've all changed, maybe not as dramatically, but just a little bit here, a little bit there. We've all gained some wisdom. We've all gone through some things. So I think that's one thing I can really appreciate about the film. And then also that it's okay to not be okay, and that the people that you think have it together do not have it together. Nobody has it together. And I think that would be the message that I would definitely pick and tell Notre Dame students, that nobody has it together. We're all just trying to get through this life and do our best, make a difference, be a good person, all that good stuff. We're all just trying our best.
Mhm. Well, I think that is a very good takeaway, particularly nowadays where, our best isn't always, it doesn't measure up to what our best necessarily used to be, but that doesn't mean it's not okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for recommending this film. And before we go,
Yes.
were you aware that Proust had a younger sister named Becky?
I was not.
He did. And Becky developed a 5-question questionnaire to determine if you love movies. Do you care to take it?
For sure.
Wonderful. So what was the first R-rated movie you saw?
So we only had one TV, and that meant we had to watch what my dad wanted to watch. So I watched quite a few R-rated movies before the whole getting your ID and going to the movie theater thing that we all did way back in the day and thought was really special and exciting to go to an R-rated movie. I have a vague memory at a very, very young age of watching Blazing Saddles.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Very inappropriate for a child.
And oops, skip a sheet. So, what movie would you be compelled to buy, even though you may already own a copy of it, if you found it at Picker's Paradise for $2?
I actually did this. I have multiple copies of Mrs. Doubtfire.
That is our guest last night said the same answer.
Really?
Yeah.
What are the odds?
That's funny. Okay. Hey, get a small collection. And what is the best movie to watch on a second date?
Man, I think it depends on how much you like the person, right?
To find out after this movie.
Yeah, right. I think it depends on the type of person you are and where you want it to go. I recently saw Parasite, and I'm gonna say Parasite because not romantic or anything like that, but because there's so much to unpack. And I feel like that's a really great movie to be like, oh, hey, you want to come in for a nightcap and talk about this movie until the wee hours of the morning.
Mm-hmm. And there, Yeah, that would be it gives you a lot of meat, right? Like, because there are all these angles and you're giving them a lot of crayons to fill in their personality as to what they're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sub question A, what is your favorite toppings on a pizza?
There is a pizza that a local chain, Hungry Howie's, I'm gonna plug them because they're amazing. It's called Bacon Cheeseburger, and it's
Mm.
the best.
Do they put pickles on it?
I don't know. If they do, I can't taste them because I hate pickles.
Oh, okay. That was an old Pizza Ranch move. So, okay. What is your favorite movie to watch while on the couch eating a Hungry Howie's bacon cheeseburger pizza?
Mm, favorite movie to watch while eating this? Hmm. Horror, definitely horror. There's something about comfort food and horror that goes together. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it's because it like comforts my anxious nerves or what. Um, I would say anything horror genre. If I had to pick a specific movie, I would maybe pick Titanic, just because that's one of those where I relive my childhood and being 8 years old and in love with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Mhm. Brings you back.
Yeah,
Mhm.
comfort
Okay,
movies with
last
comfort
question.
food.
Talk about going back. You are 10 years old
Mhm,
and you receive a screener from the future.
mhm.
What film most blows your mind?
I think it would blow my mind and I would be super excited about it. Any of the Kingsman series movies, because when I was around 10, Austin Powers was super big. And I think that that would have been a really good parallel. And I would have really loved those movies. I still love them when I watch them as an adult, but I think as a 10-year-old and, Austin Powers and those movies being all the rage, as well as some of the original Bond movies still playing as reruns on TV, I think that would have been a really cool time to see a screener for the Kingsman series.
And it's CGI and hyper referentiality are both sneaky. Like
Mhm.
they're done well, but they are extravagant. And so it would be a very classy mind blown. Like,
Mhm.
it's not an
Definitely.
Avatar. It's like, oh, this is just a super slick James Bond from the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, one second about, let me do the calculations. Carry the 3, add the bacon, cheeseburger. Hey, turns out you love movies. Becky never lies. And we loved having you here on Zoom back camera. Thank you so much for being a guest and for choosing this film that was a lot of fun to unpack. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I had a great time. Bye.
Hey, everybody out there, have a great night. And we hope to see you the rest of the week when we'll be talking with Pam Wolchek about Pillow Talk and Cats, the musical from the 90s, that PBS version with Bettina Spencer. Until then, have a great night, everybody.